Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Odin's movie blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be talking about the box office for Ford v Ferrari and how much money this film is likely to lose. That's right, you heard me correctly. Ford v Ferrari is actually, at this point in time, set to lose pretty big at the box office because it is just not doing any money overseas, especially in comparison to its domestic totals, and it costs a pretty decent amount of money to actually make. And so just like with the previous video I did the other day, I'm going to go ahead and break down why is WinZip popping up right now. Anyway, I'm going to break down the budget for the film, how we get to the overall cost of the film, and also how much we get to it as unfortunately, my little puppy is letting out some gas, and it's making just me laugh very, very much because she just keeps looking at her butt and she doesn't know what's going on, and it's adorable. Anyway, random segue. I know y'all love hearing me talk about my pups, so especially seeing them in the background playing. But anyway, Ford Ferrari has up to this point made $103.5 million, with $57.7 million made in the domestic market, and the international box office bringing in $45.8 million. The production budget for this film is set to be around $97.6. So let's, for the sake of argument, round up to $100 million, since that seems to be probably within the range of how much the film actually costs, because production budgets can range. The studios are never really upfront with exactly how much they spent on the production, and they definitely are not very upfront about how much they spend on the overall promotion materials for a film, which is why the usual standard is set: take 50% of the actual budget of the film, add that number to the budget, and you end up getting around the number that they spent on the film. So if we assume the production budget for this movie was around $100 million, and therefore the marketing campaign, what's 50% of that? That would be $50 million. Add that $50 million in marketing to the $100 million production cost, and the film probably costs around $150 million. Now, I saw a bunch of people in my last video and also on Twitter in the comments section talking about how they heard and read an article that certain movies are spending certain amount of money. They're talking about how Charlie's Angels actually had a much larger marketing campaign, which is why that film probably has lost more money. And that might be true. The reason why I do the numbers this way is because I'm giving you an estimate. I'm giving you what the film is likely going to lose, generally speaking. It's going to be somewhat close to this number. That's why I always try and make it clear that these are all estimates. I'm not finding the exact number that the movie's going to make. I'm just getting within the ballpark range of the film. And I try and make that clear through the video. And if I'm not making that clear, I'm very sorry. I'll try and make that clear when I do this video's numbers in a second. So $100 million, $150 million total. That would be the $100 million production budget, as you see down here, and the $50 million in the marketing campaign, which, again, rule of thumb, 50% of your production budget, tack that on. That's about as much as a studio will spend. So $150 million spent on this film to both make and to promote it. So far, it has only made $103.5 million. Well, how much of this film likely going to make by the end of its run? Well, we've actually gotten to the sweet spot of this film's release in that it's been out for 2 weeks. And the rule of thumb also, generally speaking, this is just done by a lot of the research that I've done on movie releases. Most films tend to make between 50 and 70%. I know that's quite a range, but still, between 50 and 70% of its entire box office total in the first 2 weeks, basically meaning that it makes a lot of money. And that's because studios get 90% of the box office receipts in the first 2 weeks, and also more people tend to go see their movies in the first 2 weeks as well. The longer that the film is in the theater, the less money the studio actually makes. And of course, when you have releases in other countries like China, for example, it can drive that number down over time, which is why around 60% or so is the standard number for how much money they tend to make in the first 2 weeks. So let's assume the $103.5 million is 60% of what it eventually will make. Well, then we can do some reverse math, some reverse engineering, which I know everyone loves to hear about. And that would mean that the film will likely make somewhere around $172.5 million. How do we get there? Well, as you can see on here, you take the number you have, multiply it by 10, divide it by 6, and that gives you the number of what the film will eventually make. Because what is $103.5 million out of $172.5? 60%. So that's how you reverse engineer that equation. You can do that for any movie as long as you have the first 2 weeks in the can. Now, what if the film does very well down the stretch? What if it actually overperforms in the latter weeks after the first 2 weeks? And that's definitely possible. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility, but it's going to be a lot harder for a film like Ford v Ferrari to keep up the momentum, especially when you have a lot of other wide releases like Frozen 2 that just came out and many other films coming out in late November and early December. So you could theoretically have the movie do better than expected and end up making another $100 million or so. Though I don't think that's exactly what's going to happen. If it did, that would mean it would have made 50% of its entire box office run in the first 2 weeks. How do we know that? Because if this is half of what it's going to make, you multiply 103.5 times 2, and that gets your overall number, which of course would be around $206 million, $207 million, depending on the 0.5. But that is still going to be an interesting scenario because that would still leave it in a possibility of not making its money back. And how do we know that? Because we know that not only do films tend to make around 60%, so again, between 50 and 70%, if a film does really bad in the later weeks, then it makes closer to 70% of its total in the first 2 weeks, which means it makes only 30% in the latter weeks, which means it's not making any money whatsoever. And that's a very bad situation. It's happened before. Films like The Last Jedi made most of its money in the first 2 weeks, and then after that was not making much money, which makes a lot of sense because there was a lot of bad press after the film initially came out. So this is a film that will likely fall closer to the 60% because it got a very strong opening release. People are still digging it. There's a lot of positive word of mouth going on around it, so 60% is likely the number we're going to get. However, we know that the math does not stop there because, remember, how much did it cost? That's right. It cost $150 million to make, and not only is this the total that we can assume it will make, but studios don't keep all of their money, as the point we made before. So what is 60% of 172.5, which is the likely end result of its box office run? That's right. $103.5 million, which means that if you have $103.5 million, or rather a production budget and marketing of 150, and you subtract the 103.5 that you will then have actually made in net profit and net gain, it means that this film is likely set to lose $46.5 million, which is actually more of a loss than what Charlie's Angels is going to lose. And the reason why is because this film costs more to make. It is making a hell of a lot more money, but it also costs that much more to make. Charlie's Angels cost around $48 million. This film costs around $100 million, which is why you're seeing such a larger dynamic. Now, let's say the film does better. Let's say that maybe Ford v Ferrari does make an extra bit of money. Maybe it does get close to the $200 million mark. Okay, let's assume that. Let's take that assumption. Let us think, hey, it's going to get closer to 50%, maybe 53% of its total was made in the first 2 weeks. That's definitely a possibility. Well, then what would we do? Well, let's just go ahead and just say, let's say it makes, for the sake of argument, $200 million. Well, remember, it doesn't keep all of that money. So what would 60% of that be? So you multiply that by 0.6, 60%. It would make $120 million. It still costs $150 million to make, though, which means you're still at a $30 million loss, meaning that this film needs to outperform in every single state, in every single country, and I just don't see how that's going to happen. There is not enough momentum on this film to get there, and it all comes down to that foreign box office, right? The $45.8 million. That just isn't enough to sustain it, and that's why the international box office is so important for larger budget films, because you can do well in the domestic office. There's a good chance that it ends around $100 million here in the States, but that means that the film will probably get closer to around $60 million or so in the international market. And that is not going to be enough in order to make back its money. So, where are we? What is this film going to end up doing? In all likelihood, Ford v Ferrari, and I hate to say this, is going to be a box office bomb and will probably be in my list of the biggest box office bombs of 2019. And what's really sad about that is that this is a film that is getting a lot of praise, is getting a lot of support. A lot of people are seeing it here in the United States, and that is a great quality to have. And we can speak about how strong it is performing in the domestic totals. The sad thing is that we now live in a world where the international marketplace is just as important. Many films have learned that. By trying to put so much money into American-focused stories, they don't do as well overseas, and you end up losing a lot of money on the process, unless, of course, you have a giant domestic box office juggernaut on your hands, which Ford v Ferrari, though it is doing well, and though I personally love it, is not doing nearly as strongly as it would need to be in order to make its money back. So that's the box office numbers on Ford v Ferrari. Do you think that it could potentially get more than the $200 million? Am I missing something? Is it possibly going to release in a country that has not been released yet that could be gaga for this type of thing? Let me know in the comment section below. If you have any questions about the math or about my numbers, please also let me know in the comment section below. If you like this video, please smash that like button. Give me a subscribe. It helps me out a lot. You're all amazing and beautiful people. I will be out of town this coming week. I'll be either leaving tomorrow night or early Wednesday morning, which means there's a chance the one-man low council stream that normally happens on Tuesday nights might not happen. If that is the case, I'm very sorry. I'll try and make that up at some point this week. But because I'll be out of town, I'm going to try and pre-record certain videos. So if you see me wearing the same clothes, that's why. And I think I'm going to keep it focused on the box office. I'm going to try and look and see if I can find, ever since Box Office Mojo went through its just identity crisis and has since just become a crappy site, there really isn't a good place where I can look and find the second weekend totals. What I used to be able to do was go to the second weekend domestic and the second weekend international, add them together, and then be able to work even if a film had been out for longer than 2 weeks. Sadly, I can't do that anymore because I have not found an equivalent site. And even on the old Box Office Mojo, it seems to be a feature that they have taken away and hidden behind a paywall, unfortunately. So I'm going to try and do some videos focused on the box office, but if there's any other news stories that pop up, I will also try and cover it. I'll be bringing my laptop. I'll be bringing my old Blue Snowball microphone as well, so that way I can record videos on the go if need be. But obviously, the main focus of this week is going to be on spending time with family, and also the results of the poll that I had on the community tab earlier were very overwhelmingly in support of doing some sort of Black Friday video, so I'll be bringing my vlog camera with me, and I plan to be going into at least one store on Black Friday to show y'all what's going on, to show y'all any movie deals, and be doing the best I can to cover that. If I can't do that, I'm very sorry. I know that there are about over half the people wanted me to do it or said maybe do it. There was a strong contingency, though, about 30% or so that said, oh, don't feed into consumerism. And I feel ya. I definitely understand it, but the people want what they want, and I'll do the very best that I can. And that video will either be posted on the Odin's movie blog channel or on the Welcome to Asgard channel, which you can get to with the cucking the eye above my head, because that's where I try and do most of my vlog videos. Anyway, you're all amazing, beautiful people. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless.